Hello students, I take great pleasure in welcoming the B.A.Part iii students of English literature for this discussion today. Today I shall share some information about the Victorian age with you. As you know, there are a couple of poets prescribed in your second paper, that is English Poetry and Drama, which pertain to the Victorian age. So, whenever you study any piece of literature, it is always very reasonable that you study a background of that age of the piece which you are about to study. So, let me give you some information about the Victorian age. It is a very well known fact that during the Victorian age, England was at the peak of its glory and richness, and that is why it was often said that the sun never sets in the English Empire. I will pick up this sentence again after I give you some facts. The period of Queen Victoria's rule is from 20th June 1837 to 26th of January 1901, which is to say that she ruled for about 64 years. She was in fact one of the longest reigning or ruling monarchs in the English history. See, 64 years is a very long time, and so it is almost more than 6 decades. She ruled for a very long time, and this long period was full of peace and prosperity. England reached the heights of its political and economic power. I say political because it was during this time that a major part of the imperialism, that is colonizing other backward nations, was conducted by England. And since it was bringing in raw material from its colonies in Asia like India and Africa, industrialization and industries were being given a boost by these raw materials. It was during this time that England was known as the most powerful nation on the earth, as the British Empire extended over 1/5 of the earth's surface. Can you believe it? The English Empire had its territories, had its boundaries of over 1/5 of the earth's surface. England had colonized many countries of Asia and Africa. So that is why if the sun was setting in one part of the British Empire, it was rising in another part of the British Empire. The British Empire had become so huge and so big that it was said that the sun never sets in the English Empire. Now, what were the social achievements of the age? I have already told you that Queen Victoria ruled for over 64 years, and so it was a long period of peace and prosperity. It was a period of refined sensibility. Arts and culture was also given a lot of attention, and therefore it was a period of refined sensibilities and self-confidence. Naturally, because England was the ruling power of the world, so the confidence of the people as well as the king was at its height. This was the period when we see a rise in the middle class, and this was also the period when social reforms like educational reforms and improvement in women's rights was being taken up by reformers and the political parties. But as I told you, because there was a lot of industrialization, there was a lot of urbanization, and this was leading to the side effects of social unrest, poverty, disease, and overpopulation. London at that time had started becoming a highly overpopulated and overcrowded city, capital city. England as a whole was rapidly transforming into an industrial society from an agricultural society. When there are political and social impacts, these impacts can be seen in the change in the cultural scenario of any country. So, what were the cultural achievements? The cultural achievements were England was undergoing rapid social cultural changes like industrialization, urbanization, and imperialism. Because of its strong grip on other Asian and African countries, England was becoming England was becoming an imperialist state very speedily, and because it had a lot of raw material from these underdeveloped countries, it was quickly helping England to set up industries. So industrialization was catching up, and industrialization was finally making cities into bigger and bigger cities, that is fast urbanization. So we see a shift from the agricultural society in England to the industrial society in England as a whole. The main cause of this cultural change was behind the factor of this industrial change was the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the steam engine, shipbuilding, and mass production in the factories. Old rural lifestyle was taken up by harsh industrialization, and this also, though it gave prosperity to England, but at the same time it gave rise to many social evils like loss in moral values and exploitation of children and women, diseases and drug addiction, etc. So there were positive changes as well as negative changes in the English culture. Now, what were the political achievements? The political achievements were Britain had become the most powerful nation on earth. There was a sense of pride and nationalism among the people. It was spreading its grip of imperialism in Asia and Africa. But it is very interesting to see that while England was trying to subjugate its colonies of Asia and Africa with the monarchical form of government or the rule of the king, back home in England itself, there was the growth of the democratic atmosphere in politics. So, by that I mean at home, that is in England itself, it was experimenting with democracy, and the countries which it was enslaving, there it was practicing monarchy. The political situation, because democracy was rising, so the political situation was divided into two parties, the Whigs and the Tories. Now, every literature is a reflection of its society. So, surely all the social, cultural and political changes were somehow or the other reflected in the literature of that age. So, what were the important characteristics of literature? The literature was basically the literature of social protest. People were protesting against the rapid urbanization, against the social evils, against the double standards of England, and the double standards were at home. They were fighting for equal rights and democracy, but abroad in their colonies they were enslaving people, and they were following the rule of the Queen Victoria or monarchy. So this literature was not very imaginative, but it was realistic literature. That means it was reflecting things close to life. Secondly, in that literature we find a true representation of life, real people, real events, and the problems of life were projected. Literature becomes a powerful instrument for human progress. People were fond of reading books and novels, and therefore this literature was giving them a means, was opening windows for them to explore the world and gain more knowledge. There was a moral element in literature because most pieces of literature carried some moral or moral lesson in it, and this literature tried to represent idealism, that is truth, justice, love, brotherhood. This was emphasized by the writers. Before the Victorian age, students, you have read the Romantic age and the romantic characteristics. So what is the difference between the literature of the Romantic age and the literature of the Victorian age? Whereas in the Romantic age we see a very important component of nature. Whichever poet you talk about, either Wordsworth or Shelley or Keats, you will see that their poetry is always based in the background of nature. There is always some talk of nature, and here in the Victorian age we see that rather than nature there is more realistic use of social issues for the theme. In the Romantic age we see poets taking us to the rural or the pastoral background. They talk about the pastoral, the ideal, and the simple life. But in the Victorian age we see that because of the rapid development in science and industrialization, now there are new themes, new topics for the writers to discuss, and we see there is a struggle between science, the truth of science, and the philosophy of religion. What did they want to believe? The writers were confused whether what science was saying is correct or whether what religion is saying is correct. So in their literature we often find a struggle between science and literature. In the Romantic age we see elements of medievalism, beauty and art, that is Hellenism, and the element of supernaturalism. Whereas in the Victorian age we see the poet talking about an individual and his place in society, and the aspiration of the main characters is for the love for social position. Now let us talk about the specific genres. First let us talk about poetry, how it was conducted in the Victorian age. In the Victorian age, poetry was used as a medium of telling stories in verse. Okay, it had a narrative element and it had a story element, and the most popular literary forms practiced in Victorian age were the dramatic monologue and elegy. These were the big achievements of the Victorian age. Victorian poetry is pictorial. Alright, so poet uses visual images to represent a situation or an emotion, and the main poets of this age were Alfred Tennyson, Robert Browning, and Matthew Arnold. Let us see a little about the Victorian novel and the drama. Novel was a very popular literary form. People were fond of reading as well as writing novels, and these novels represent a realistic and a social world. The main authors of the Victorian age were Charles Dickens, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, Thomas Hardy. They were the famous novelists. And as far as the drama is concerned, George Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde were popular dramatists who satirized the mannerisms of the upper classes. So, this was a capsule form of the main features, social, political, and cultural features of the Victorian age and the main characteristics of the Victorian literature. I hope you find this information useful to answer your questions and your curiosity, and let us meet again for the next discussion. Thank you.